Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at a pair of beautiful condition Czechoslovakian flare pistols. I got these two from Royal Tiger Imports. They are ex-Slovakian military, so they're surplus, sent over here and now available. You can see them showing up on the market these days. And I figured, let's take a look at both of them because they're very similar. We have the model VZ44/67 and VZ44/81. Now, both of these are descended from the Russian SPSh Shpagin-designed World War II 1944 pattern flare pistol. And it's a very simple break-action, single-barrel flare pistol. Like, open it, insert flare, close it, cock hammer, pull trigger, flare fires. Really quite simple. I actually have a previous video on an original Russian one. I'll link to that in the description text below if you'd like to take a look at it. But Czechoslovakia got the technical data package, such as it is for something this simple, for this flare pistol in 1951. They put it into production in 1952 and manufactured it until 1958. And these would serve as the early flare pistols for the Czechoslovakian military and security organizations throughout the country. Now, the problem was in the 1950s, Czechoslovakia didn't have really good manufacturing capability going. They were recovering from war, they were getting into communism, and the steels that they had available to make these flare pistols were all pretty basic, generic, not great steels. They wouldn't get good steel alloys available until basically the end of the 1950s after they'd finished production on the flare pistols. So as they get into the 1960s, they've got their flare pistols, a very utilitarian sort of thing that militaries use. They're not really glamorous, but they are very useful. And the guns start wearing out. The problem is the 1950s Czechoslovakian production, these guns only have a service life of like 1,000 rounds before the barrel hinges start to wear. They sometimes start to pop open on their own when you fire them, which is not a great thing. They're very prone to rust and corrosion, both on the outside and in the bores. They need to be replaced. So in 1966, the CZ factory at Uhersky Brod starts work on a modernization program for the flare pistol. They make 3 different samples of different versions that are ready in the spring of 1966, late spring, June of 1966, and in January 1967, they hold an official trial. So one of these is essentially the current product, the version that they would end up adopting. One of them had a manual safety lever on it. They decide during testing that that's not really necessary. It's just kind of redundant. You know, it's a single shot gun. You don't need to chamber a flare and then carry it on safe. You just don't chamber a flare until you're ready to shoot. It's a signal pistol. At any rate, they adopt the best version of the 3 that they have, and they put it into production. So in May of 1968, they finished the first test batch of 200 of these. They're good to go, and they get going on the serial production. So let's take a closer look at what it was they were making. This is the VZ44/67. These are really simple mechanically. You've got a whopping 3 controls. You've got the trigger for firing, the hammer for cocking, and this lever here for opening. So to open the barrel, you take this lever and you kind of slide it forward, like so, and then the barrel pivots open. It does have an automatic extractor here as you pivot the barrel up. This is cammed outward, which pushes the empty flare cartridge out. These use the really pretty standard 26.5 millimeter flares that you'll find in general purpose use all over the place. This one is a fired empty flare that I already shot off. So it goes in like that. You close it, you cock the hammer, and then fire. And that's all there is to it. You then pop the lever forward, open the barrel, and you can see it's going to cam the empty flare out until I can pull it out with my bare hands. Now let's take a look at the markings on here. We have SHE, that is the factory code for the Uhersky Brod CZ factory. The original 1950s versions were marked TGE. They were made by Zbrojovka Brno. We have the crossed swords that are a Czechoslovakian military proof mark. 1968 is the date of production, and the serial number is F1877, which is on the frame and also on the barrel. Now, the serial numbers are kind of interesting on these because they were being made at that same time when Czechoslovakia was really paranoid that the evil capitalist West would discover how many of the various munitions they were making. So in order to be sneaky, they came up with sort of a coded serial number system. And you actually see this on CZ52 pistols from a bit earlier, where they have 2-letter suffixes and 4-digit numbers that are all weird. Well, in this case, they made these guns in batches of 3,500 per prefix. So this is an F prefix. They made batches of B, D, E, F, H, J, and K, each of them running from 1,000 or from 1001 up to 3,500. So if you just looked at it randomly, you would naturally assume that, well, if it's 4 digits, they would have made 10,000 in this series, and this is F, so they must have done A, B, C, D, E all before this. In reality, they skipped 2/3 of the numbers and several of the letters, and so that's their dastardly plan to prevent Western capitalism from figuring out how many flare pistols they made. In total, production of the Model 67 was 24,808. Production took place in 68 and 69. The very last 207 of them were actually assembled from parts that were left over in 1970. So you'll see a very few marked 70, but the rest of them are all going to be 68 and 69 production. Now, compared to the original Russian flare pistols and the early Czech copies thereof, this has a number of significant improvements to it. First off, the outside is both phosphated and then painted with that very recognizable Czech like gray paint. So that makes them much more corrosion resistant than the early production guns. In fact, they even chrome line the barrels, which you can sort of see there, but chrome lined barrels on there. The hinge pin at the front is substantially larger in diameter than the original Russian design, which gives them a longer, that's a big part of giving them a longer service life. The original Russian ones had a pair of wooden grip panels. The Model 67 gets a single wraparound grip panel there, made out of that same sort of phenolic resin, the quote-unquote beaver barf that you will see VZ58 furniture made out of. And that's pretty much it. You got a lanyard loop on the bottom, no sights, because it's just a flare pistol. You point it up in the air and pull the trigger. Just to give you an idea of the flares, here are 2 of the flare boxes that I got. Flares are made in a variety of colors. These are actually Czech flares that were imported a long time ago. So that's a big white flare. That's a triple red flare. This is the short version. That is the long version. These pistols will fire both of them with equal ease. And we also happen to have the original cases that these came with. So in use, you would holster the flare pistol right there. You've got space for 3 short flares on the front and a flap that locks in place. Flip it over on the back, you've got a second flap opening, and back here you can store 5 of the long flares. There we go. That one's actually still live and usable. So pretty simple shoulder strap to carry it. Still a pretty utilitarian carry case even today. The Model 1967 is a way better flare pistol than the early 1950s production, but give it 10 or 15 years and even those start to wear out, get damaged, get lost or destroyed in accidents, and the Czechoslovakian military finds itself with a shortage of flare pistols. It needs to get some more. So, since they're going to put these back into production, CZ looks at a program of maybe we can improve them a little bit more. They consider a significant redesign and decide against it. They figure if we basically keep the gun the same, we can have interchangeable parts between the 2 models, but we can make maybe a few upgrades to the new pattern. And they do. They actually change the alloy of the frame side plates, and they're able to increase the lifespan from 3,500 to 4,000 rounds, which is not bad. The guns go into production in 1981, hence the designation VZ44/81. 81, and they end up making just over 40,000 of these, so even more than they did of the 1967 ones. Let's take a closer look. I'll show you a couple of the other little minor changes that they made to the 81 pattern. Production of the model 44/81 began in September of 1981 and ran until June of 1983. They had given up by this point the encoded serial numbers. And so here instead, we still see the factory code, same code, SHE, that's Uhersky Brod, 1983 production on this one, the military proof mark, and just a plain 5-digit serial number. These started at 10,001, and they ran to 50,010 for a grand total of 40,009 of them manufactured, and the number is also repeated on the barrel, although the barrel number is a little smeared there. These are functionally identical pistols. Parts do interchange between them, but they did make a couple of improvements to the Model 81. So the most obvious thing is the checkering that was added to the grips. That was something that was actually requested during testing, and they agreed to add it. However, it took them a little time to outsource a new mold, so the first 2,000 of these were actually delivered with smooth grips, like the earlier 1967 pattern. But then they went to textured grip panels. You can see that the barrel opening lever here is a little bit longer and a little bit more curved, easier to get a grip on. Again, you grab it and just pull it forward to pivot the barrel open. The hammer profile was changed just slightly. It's given a little bit of a curve, which I suppose means you're a little less likely to have your thumb slip off when you're cocking it, but you know, this is a pretty minor variation. And the only reason to do this sort of thing is because they'd been out of production for near 15 years at this point. They had to make some new tooling anyway. So, hey, you know, if there are any little minor tweaks that you want to make to the guns, this is the time to do it. Unfortunately, today in the US, the flares for these flare pistols are not nearly as available or cheap as they used to be. I got some of these back many years ago when they were being imported, and even then, like the hazmat fees for shipping them were kind of ridiculous. But 26.5 millimeter is a very standard flare cartridge size, and so if you're looking for something to actually use as a signaling device, something, I mean, I kept a flare pistol like this in my truck for a very long time when I was living in a rural area, figuring, hey, you know, you might find yourself in a position where you actually want to launch a flare to let someone know where you are. Never had to use it, but I thought it was a neat thing to have. They're cheap, they're quite affordable through Royal Tiger right now, and they're in great condition, and they're just a cool piece of military history. So being flare pistols, they are not subject to the Gun Control Act of 1968. You don't have to go through an FFL, so you can actually just buy one and have it sent directly to your house from anyone, not just Royal Tiger. So anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing a little bit of the backstory of something that's not particularly glamorous. Thanks to Royal Tiger for sending these two over. Thanks to my friends at lifeofliberty.cz for the cool swag t-shirt. And a big thanks to the VHU, the Czech Military Technical Institute, where I got the information on these pistols. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.